Welcome to the Global Pulse, a short video series where our experts break down a trending topic in international business and why it matters to you.
These days, there are two things that you hear on the news almost every day: inflation and supply chain disruptions. So let's start with inflation. Prices are going up. We probably all feel it in our wallet when we do our groceries or when we go to the gas station. And the question is whether what we're seeing now is transitory inflation or permanent inflation. And there's a lot of debate on this. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen believes that it's transitory, right? But that doesn't mean that inflation will go away anytime soon. And what the market is watching closely is what the Fed will do in the next few months, right? If prices continue to rise, then the Fed might raise interest rates, which will slow down the economic recovery. And the Fed is already tapering off their bond purchases. But at the same time, right, if inflation is more permanent than we think, should the Fed act sooner? Right? This is a question that central banks around the world are wrestling with. In fact, some central banks have already raised interest rates. And the Fed and the European Central Bank have not yet, but they can start as early as the end of this year. So how did we get here, right? Why are prices increasing? So a few things, right? We have a tight labor market. That means higher wages, higher prices. But a key factor that is in play in the current cycle is the supply chain disruptions, right? We've all heard about the semiconductor shortage. There we had the perfect storm, right? Surge in demand for electronic devices during the pandemic. At the same time, factories were either closed down or operating at lower capacity due to COVID, right? And all this was exacerbated by the fire in Japan, the drought in Taiwan. Right? And one fun fact that I didn't know before is that you need a massive amount of water to make semiconductors. So when you have a shortage in raw materials, you're going to have a shortage in the finished goods. And this is affecting not just auto and tech sectors. There's supply chain bottlenecks everywhere. You might remember these pictures of cargo ships waiting outside the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach last month, right? At some point, there were 70, 80 cargo ships waiting, right? And just to put it in perspective, pre-COVID, the average number of cargo ship waiting at these ports is one, right? And one reason why we went from 1 to 70 is the surge in demand for consumer goods during the pandemic, right? Consumers are spending less on services and more on goods and home improvements. And a lot of these goods are imported from Asia. And so when these cargo ships are stuck waiting, there's not enough supply. And this is just one layer of the supply chain problem, right? There's also a shortage in truck drivers. So in short, when demand is high, supply is low, prices go up. And perhaps going back to the big question, right? Is this transitory inflation? And that's going to depend on whether things will get better soon, right? Soon next year. Can we fix some of these supply chain bottlenecks? Ports are now operating for longer hours. Businesses are ramping up their supply. And if consumers are reversing back to their normal spending levels, right? That means like purchasing fewer goods, more services, then things should get better, right? But at the same time, you're seeing energy prices keep rising. There are labor shortages bubbling up in more sectors. And these are perhaps the reasons why economists are revising their inflation forecast upward. At this point, it's very hard to say which forces will come in stronger. Right? We all have to wait and see how these things unfold in the next few months to get a sense of whether there's some light at the end of this inflation tunnel.